Okay, you know the feeling, right? The elevator door slides shut, you're standing there with a coworker, and you can just feel it coming. That little turn, that polite smile, and then the dreaded phrase. All of a sudden, you are trapped in the small talk vortex.
And just like that, you can feel your soul trying to find the nearest emergency exit. If you've ever felt that this kind of casual chit chat is less like a conversation and more like, I don't know, a low grade form of torture, well, I've got some really good news for you.
You are definitely not alone. And here's the most important part. It does not mean you're rude or arrogant or antisocial. The reason you have this almost physical reaction to these conversations, well, it actually reveals something incredibly deep about the way your brain is wired.
That's right. This isn't some character flaw you need to fix. It's a fundamental feature of your psychology. So in this explainer, we're going to break down exactly what is happening inside your head when someone tries to force you to talk about the weather.
So what's the number one reason we hate small talk? Well, it all comes down to what your brain is literally starving for. Psychologists have this fantastic term for it, a high need for cognition. It's just a fancy way of saying that your brain isn't some passive thing just taking in information. Nope, it's an active hunter. It actually enjoys thinking and exploring complex ideas and chewing on something with real substance. And you can almost picture the chemical reaction here. For a brain like this, small talk offers absolutely zero nourishment. There's no challenge, no new information, no puzzle to solve. It's like being served an empty plate, and your brain releases almost no dopamine. But you pivot that conversation to a big idea or a personal philosophy or a shared fear, and that same brain just lights up. It is finally getting the satisfying mental meal it craves. So the crucial point here is this. It's not about hating people. It's about having a brain that is basically allergic to interactions that don't have a destination. You would much rather sit in comfortable silence than take a conversational road trip to nowhere. So, if our brains are wired for meaning, what happens when we're forced into these meaningless conversations? Well, that brings us to our second point, the sheer, crushing exhaustion of having to put on a show. For some people, small talk is effortless. It's like breathing. But for you, it can feel like a really high-stakes mental chess match. And it's high stakes because you're not just talking. You are constantly trying to predict the right move, say the right line, and not break some invisible social rule. And this is basically the chaos that's unfolding in your head. While you're supposed to be just casually chatting, your mind is secretly running all these diagnostic programs at once. You're analyzing social cues, monitoring your own facial expressions, and scripting your next line. It is impossible to actually be present in the moment. There's actually a scientific term for all this mental effort. It's called cognitive load. And because you're so busy performing and analyzing, your cognitive load just skyrockets during small talk. Your brain starts to associate this entire category of interaction not with connection, but with stress and mental fatigue. It's just tiring. This brings us to an even deeper level of the performance. I mean, just think about this exchange. We are trained from the time we're kids to follow this script. But what happens when that script directly contradicts our reality? When you're having an absolutely terrible day, but the social script demands you say, "I'm fine, thanks," it can feel like you're lying. And for people who deeply value honesty, this isn't just a little white lie. It feels like a tiny, pointless betrayal of who you actually are in that moment. This discomfort actually stems from a core psychological drive for what's called existential authenticity. It's this fundamental need to be true to yourself. So when small talk forces you to say things you don't mean and perform feelings you don't have, it doesn't just feel boring, it can feel like a violation of that core value. Which brings us to our final and maybe most important point. What if this whole experience, this hatred of small talk, what if it isn't a weakness at all? What if we reframe it as a hidden strength? So, some research suggests that most people can't handle more than about 30 seconds of conversational silence before they start to panic. They feel this overwhelming urge to fill that void with, you guessed it, more small talk. But for those of us who hate the superficial stuff, silence can be a welcome friend. You instinctively get that shared silence isn't a failure of conversation. It's actually a sign of a deeper trust. It's a nonverbal agreement that just says, hey, I'm so comfortable with you that I don't need to perform. We can just be. And in a world of constant noise, that is an incredibly profound connection. Now, the common stereotype, the myth, is that people who dislike small talk are cold, arrogant, or think they're too good for other people. But the reality is often the complete opposite.
It's not about arrogance, it's about authenticity and a real willingness to be vulnerable. I mean, think about it. Talking about the weather is safe. Nobody gets hurt, nobody gets judged. But asking a real question, sharing a real thought, expressing a real vulnerability, that's a risk. You might be misunderstood or even rejected. So when you skip the script and try to go straight for depth, you're not being superior. You're being brave. You're choosing the risk of a genuine connection over the safety of polite distance. So let's wrap all of this up. If you hate small talk, please hear this. You are not broken. You are not flawed. Your brain is simply wired to hunt for meaning. You are exhausted by the performance of social scripts, and you crave something authentic. You just intuitively understand that true connection is about quality, not quantity. And research actually backs this up. People who prefer deep, meaningful conversations tend to report having fewer, but much, much stronger and more satisfying friendships. They would rather have 2 people who know their soul than 20 people who only know what they did last weekend. Does the safety of the shallow end comfort you? Or do you feel most alive when you're taking the risk of diving into the deep end? There's no right answer, of course, but just knowing where you stand can change how you see every single conversation from now on. I would genuinely love to hear your thoughts on this. Let's start a real conversation down in the comments. And yes, you have my full permission to skip the pleasantries.